back to the lead story here on CVM TV. So I spent some time going through the Constitutional Reform Committee report, and now I have people who are eminently qualified to talk about why the decisions were made, why the recommendations were made rather, what went into them, and maybe they could have gone a certain way. What is the consideration that caused them to move from an obvious course of action to what was indeed agreed and put in the report that was taken to cabinet and then of course submitted in the parliament as a ministry paper. King's Counsel Hugh Small is with me to start us off. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much.
The first thing I want to ask is this. Simplify for my viewers, explain to them what is entrenchment versus deep entrenchment when they talk about the Constitution. The reason I ask this question, public commentators and journalists are guilty of throwing these references around, thinking that the ordinary public, the person in the public, understands what they're talking about when entrenchment versus deep entrenchment is mentioned, and I want to ask you to simplify.
Well, one of the points I want to make at the beginning is that there were a variety of views on the committee, and there were those of us who felt that even as we were considering the various proposals that would go into the report, that there should be a public education program that would have started to explain to the people what is in the existing Constitution, and that would have addressed the question of what is entrenched and what is deeply entrenched. The entrenched provisions of the Constitution are those that require a vote, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, of 2/3 plus 1. And that guarantees that in respect of the Senate, that at least one member of the opposition party would be voting in favor of the amendments to the Constitution. The deeply entrenched provisions in the Constitution go further than that, because in addition to having the 2/3 majority plus 1 in both houses of Parliament, it also does require that there be a referendum. We have never amended the Jamaican Constitution with a referendum, ever. The first time that we had a referendum was in 1961, and we were not dealing with a constitutional issue. We're dealing with a decision as to whether we should stay in the Federation or leave. The majority of people voted to leave, and so we left. The referendum took place on the 19th of September, 1961, and the Constitution was drafted in literally 4 months. Because by January of 1962, the delegation led by the Premier, Mr. Manley, and the leader of the opposition, Mr. Bustamante, who subsequently became the Prime Minister
of independent Jamaica,
were in London. So it was drafted in a very short period of time and without the involvement of the Jamaican people, to the extent that we could say that the Jamaican people really understood what was happening.
And this now is a process that will make the Constitution belong to the Jamaican people.
Yes, because the existing Constitution is actually an order in council that was made in Britain at Buckingham Palace and signed by the present King's mother in her capacity as Queen. So it is not a Jamaican statute in the best sense of legal language. The only amendments that are really from the Jamaican Parliament are those amendments like, for example, the Charter of Rights, which were passed by the Jamaican Parliament. And those were entrenched provisions that involved the 2/3 plus 1. And indeed, because of how it was approached, it was literally unanimous.
Hear you on that. All right. Let's get to it then, because in the summary of the recommendations of the report, my producer is telling me that I have Dr. Nadine Spence on. Yes, I do. Good afternoon, Dr. Spence. Are you hearing me? Not sure she's hearing me. We'll sort that out. All right. The Jamaicanization of the Constitution, King's Counsel. I note here that it says, the report. Yes, I'm hearing you now, Dr. Spence. Good afternoon. Welcome to the show.
Muted myself and didn't realize. Thank you for having me.
There you go. King's Counsel Hugh Small is sitting with me in studio. Let me start with him. King's Counsel, the replacement of the King of England with a non-executive president. Was an executive president considered, and why did the committee ultimately decide to put forward the recommendation of making the president non-executive?
Well, as I told you earlier, there are different points of view within the committee.
Yes.
But this was a consensus to which we came, because changing to an executive president would mean a complete overhaul of government as we know it in the country, in that the people would be voting for the executive president. The executive president would not be sitting in the legislature. The executive president would appoint ministers, not from within the legislature, but those ministers would have to be approved by the legislature. The members of the legislature would be a separate part of government from the president, and they would have the responsibility of looking at legislation which was introduced by the president,
Yes.
or just as happens in the United States of America, or introducing their own
Yes.
legislation. It was felt that, and this is a view I think that eventually we were fairly unanimous on.
Yes.
It was felt that the radical overhaul of the Jamaican Constitution in that way was not something that could be undertaken at this time of our development.
Hear you on that. Let's take the break and come right back. We're wading into the recommendations of the Constitutional Reform Committee and the recommendations that will Jamaicanize the Constitution and finally make this very important document something that we can truly call our own. More after these on Lead Story.
Live in Kingston, Jamaica.
Living in Rome, my people how safe you are. Away from your home, I say.
Sizzler! Live!
Yeah, crush them! From big long,
Crystal Road Records.
why don't know pan them? Why them from like it's a note pan them? Gorillas come out pan them. Beaters and run out pan them. Why don't know pan them? From like it's a note pan them.
Welcome back to Lead Story here on CVM TV. I'm speaking with two members of the Constitutional Reform Committee, Dr. Nadine Spence and King's Counsel Hugh Small. Dr. Spence is on Zoom. King's Counsel Small is sitting to my right. Dr. Spence, many people feel that we should have a president in Jamaica who has, not to speak in the pejorative sense, but have real powers beyond the ceremonial ones exercised by the current Governor General, whose post will be transposed into the office of President. The consideration that swayed the committee ultimately to move away from an executive president consideration, was that because of any instability that an executive president has been seen to cause in some countries that have gone that route?
In fact, that was one of the conversations we had. We looked at executive presidencies and what were the advantages of them and what it is that we thought our people were asking for when they spoke to the need for an executive president, and whether or not our current system fulfills those asks, and then, what should flow from that. So we looked at executive systems globally. We looked at the kinds of political tradition that they emerge out of. We examined our political tradition. I think as well we looked at the kind of, as Hugh said, in order for this to happen, what are the other changes that would flow from it. The implications socially, economically, and so on were examined as well. So it was a total examination of both systems, an examination of what people were asking for, an examination of whether or not we think the current fit can deliver what people are asking for.
Yes.
And looking at the tradition within the political tradition within which we operate, and trying to answer the question as to whether or not our political tradition can stand up to the question.
A lot of people felt.
Yes. Yes.
A lot of people express the view that they do not have the right to vote for who becomes prime minister.
Yes.
But the prime minister is in fact the head of the government.
Yes.
But that in an executive presidency, they would have the right to vote for the executive president.
Yes.
And so that was the argument that we found coming out even when we went on town hall meetings.
Yes.
But of course, the wish that people could directly vote for the prime minister has not been fulfilled in the recommendations that have been put forward.
Hear you on that. I want to ask the two of you about something that, in my view, is the only perhaps troubling aspect of the set of recommendations put forward. Dr. Spence, I'll start with you. Because I'm saying to myself, knowing what I know about how Britain does it, and I'm a huge fan of British politics, the use of a secret ballot for matters concerning the selection of the president and even the removal of the president from office, I have a problem with that, and I'm wondering if the committee went on a jousting match, a to and fro over it. What is it that compelled the committee to eventually agree that I should not know what my member of parliament is doing in terms of his or her vote for the person who will serve as president and for removing that same person from office? Why a secret ballot, Dr. Spence?
There was a jousting, there was a putting forward of different positions. Different people at different points thought it should be open, that we should not have a secret ballot. But then it was felt that given our political culture and given how things have evolved in our politics up to this point, a secret ballot would allow people to vote on their conscience. And perhaps we'd get a truer reflection of what people wanted to see, so that people wouldn't necessarily have to vote along party lines, for example, if their party wanted them to vote for a particular president and they didn't think they could vote with all good conscience vote along that way. So I think a number of considerations were given, a number of perspectives were shared, and I think we eventually coalesced around the idea that because we wanted people to vote along the line of their conscience rather than along political lines, it would
hear you on that. King's Counsel, your perspective.
Please don't call me King's Counsel.
Mr. Small.
Or Hugh.
Or Hugh. Sir Hugh, listen, I'm saying that the Brexit vote in the UK, I know how the Member of Parliament for Islington North, my good friend, our good friend, Jeremy Corbyn, how he voted. The man from, I know how Jacob Rees-Mogg voted, how Boris Johnson voted, how all of the main players in the House of Commons voted. Why is it that the selection of the president is so hostage to the politically tribal nature of Jamaica that we have to have men and women sent to Parliament by their constituents, hide behind the veil of secrecy when making such an important vote?
George, one of the problems that we faced in our deliberations from the very beginning was whether the discussions of the committee should have been open to the public, whether they should have heard the variety of points of view that were being expressed within the committee and therefore able to understand how we came to consensus. Because I think a lot of the concerns that people now have would have been better understood.
Yes, if you were witness to the deliberations.
And also I have a concern that the verbatim notes, the verbatim record should be available to the public so they can see that.
Yes.
People have different points of view. And at the end of the day, the consensus that was arrived at doesn't necessarily reflect the points of view of every single member of the committee.
I hear you on that. I really think that deserves revisiting because.
The time by Grace. Taste that moves you is
6:45.
Sizzla Kalonji live in Kingston, Jamaica.
Living in Rome, my people, how safe you are. Away from your home, I say.
Sizzla live.
Yeah, crush them. From big long
World Records.
why don't know pan them? Why them from night till sun out pan them? Gorillas come out pan them. Beaters and run out pan them. Why don't know pan them? From night till sun out pan them.
It's MSW Events 10th year anniversary, and we proudly present our signature mass wedding 14-14-14. This June, Jamaica will witness 24 deserving couples become one in an unforgettable ceremony. Save the date as we embark on an enchanting journey to June 14, 2024.
Jamaica's favorite drama, Your Guilty Pleasure.
All that having a baby now is going to do for you is make you a prisoner of this apartment.
Long run shot, kid.
Royal Palm Estate is on CVM every Tuesday and Sunday at 9 p.m.
With a chance. Jamaica! Jamaicans draw first blood. Damari Gray scores! Kel Antonio, and it's a goal!
And the Reggae Boys take the lead.
And Jamaica puts this one on ice.
The National Labor Day concert will be on this Labor Day, May 23, Emancipation Park, with some of Jamaica's leading gospel artists, led by Minister Kevin Downswell,
Got a feeling.
Rhoda Isabella,
When we
Gotti, John Mark Wigan,
we have a karate. Nobody no more down.
and many, many more. The National Labor Day concert is live right here on CVM this Labor Day, May 23, 8:30 p.m.
Got a feeling. This is gonna be my year.
The Constitutional Reform Committee is recommending that the new president of Jamaica be a Jamaican citizen by birth or descent, be ordinarily resident in Jamaica, and be permanently in Jamaica for at least 10 of the last 15 years preceding nomination, must not be under a duty of allegiance to a foreign state or foreign power by his or her own act and not another person's, and not be disqualified for election to the Parliament. Hugh Small is with me. Sir, I ask you, does this simply mean that no dual citizen can be eligible to stand for election as president?
Yes.
Simple as that.
Simple as that.
And why?
Because we feel that we felt, and this was a point on which I think we had genuine consensus, we felt that the president should be a unifying force in our society, and that his or her leadership should not involve any question of loyalties to another state. We also felt that in the case of the diaspora, where you have a Jamaican who may have been living in England or New Zealand or wherever for some time and comes back but is a person who we could consider to be the president, that person can't just come in and in 2 years or 4 years become eligible to be president. So they have to be here for a period of 10 years.
Yeah.
They come soaked in the culture that we live here, not just what is thought to be our culture in the airways.
Dr. Spencer, fine print of the report says that the descent aspect, the descent criterion ought to be that you are third generation Jamaican. So you can't be second generation Jamaican and be eligible for president. How does that make sense?
Not second, no, up to third generation. You can be second and you can be first.
Yes.
So up to your grandfather.
Yes.
Grandfather, father, but not beyond the third.
Not beyond the third. But why that limitation on it? So if I qualify by virtue of how long I've lived here and I meet all the other requirements, why did the committee see fit to insert that criterion in it about the generational antecedents of the person?
Because you can be at this. What we discussed was the fact that you can be a Jamaican citizen up to about 10th or more generation, and we felt that there needed to be a closer degree of relationship to the relative that lived here or was a Jamaican for you to assume the highest office of the land. And that had to do with also what you said in terms of that we wanted this to be somebody who genuinely reflected the unity of the country and in whom the spirit of the nation could be, could be seen. And we felt that a closer degree of descendancy would be much more appropriate to that call.
Yeah, the issue of the court, and we couldn't leave without addressing the elephant in the room, because it's an elephant so big that it is a stumbling block. It appears to be a roadblock, not even a stumbling block, a roadblock to the advancement of the constitutional reform process. Sir Hugh, I ask you this. Phase one of these consultations was always designed to not include the matter of the final appellate court, because the government signposted that early from last year. The opposition nominees to the committee were always clear that, look, we want to hear this position on this final court. We'd like it to be in phase one, but we'll continue working until that becomes clear. Now that issue of a final court has emerged as en passe material. Do you see us with the ability, the political maturity to get past of an agreement between the parties so we can move forward with this process?
I personally am of the view that the architecture of the terms of reference were designed to avoid discussion of the question of the final court. Yes. And so we are now in the anomaly where the executive branch of government is to be Jamaicanized. The legislative branch is to be Jamaicanized, but the judicial branch, the courts that can decide on the constitutionality of the behavior of the executive and the legislature, as happened in the recent, and is happening in the recent case regarding the legislation to extend the term of the
DPP Attorney General?
Yes.
Auditor General, rather?
You are in a situation in which you're going to have ultimately to depend on the Royal Court of Charles III to determine that. It is anomalous.
Yes.
I think the whole way in which the constitutional reform process was started and was sailed was flawed, because there should have been a discussion between the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister, and it should not have been the Holness administration's objectives, but national objectives. The whole structure of the Constitution indicates that this kind of amendment that we are attempting to perfect should be a national program rather than a program of one particular administration rather than the other.
Dr. Spence, I extend to you about 90 seconds to give me your perspective on the issue of the impasse. How do we get beyond what the final appellate court has caused to happen to this constitutional reform process?
In another point relevant to what Hugh just said, in our meeting at the cabinet the other day, one of the things that the Prime Minister pointed out, that the government's move towards a constitutional reform committee came primarily from the belief that there was agreement with the opposition based on statements made by the opposition leader in Parliament, and the meetings that were had at the Vale Royal Talk, where the matter of the Caribbean, the final appellate court, was not the primary thing on the agenda. There were other issues preceding that. And then the opposition agreed to go ahead with the constitutional reform process. So there was consensus at the beginning, but that what I am seeing is not that there wasn't a consensus at the beginning, it's that the consensus eventually broke down. And this consensus, I mean, between government and opposition, that the process should proceed because they both understood that on the matter of the final court, there was need for more discussions, there were need for more conversation,
yes,
because it's a much more complex issue than this first phase could take care of.
Hear you on that. Take
George, it wasn't just government and opposition on the Constitution Reform Committee.
Yes.
I was there. I do not represent the opposition. I was nominated by Mr. Golding.
Yes.
But I am not a member of the party, and
yes,
I don't represent the opposition.
Yes.
There were faith-based groups there.
Yes.
There were other groups. So it's not just a question of government and opposition. This is a national program.
Yes.
It is
and
based
that's how
on
it
the
needs to be.
constitutional requirements for consensus, Hugh.
Yes.
The constitutional requirement for consensus is what we are talking about. Yes, there is need for the involvement of greater and more voices in the debate. That's not what the conversation is about. You raised the issue of it being a national program because the opposition and the government should have met. And I was just pointing out to you that it would appear that that meeting did take place and there was consensus from the utterings of the leader of the opposition.
We're out of time, Dr. Spence. We're out of time. There's a section of this program called George's Take where I give my take, but I'm going to have to relinquish it or do it in this way to ask you, simple question. Is there a way around this impasse? Yes or no, Dr. Spence? Do you see one?
Not. There's no way. There's no way around it. Government and opposition must sing from the same hymn sheet as it relates to constitutional reform.
Sir Hugh, the final word is yours. Is there a way around or we have to wheel and come again?
I think we're going to have to wheel and come again.
Simple as that. And that's it. And that's just like that we end Lead Story. A lot of work being done or has been done. And it's as if the work has been laid waste by communication issues, the government and the opposition, and the need for a broader national perspective on the issue of Jamaica's final appellate court. It would be a shame if after all the work that has gone in, the issue of constitutional reform is to die on this mountain. That's been Lead Story. I want to thank Dr. Nadine Spence. I want to thank Hugh Small, and thank you for watching here Lead Story on CVM TV.
Hey Carlton, what's up? Welcome to my